Welcome to Planet Poetry, the podcast for poets and poetry lovers. My name's Peter Kenny.
And I'm Robin Houghton. In each episode, we interview a poet and ask them to share some of their work. Today, we're meeting Richard Scott, who will be talking about his excellent new collection, That Broke into Shining Crystals.
Then we'll delve into a verdant world and find D.H. Lawrence and Derek Jarman there.
Ooh.
And also we're going to ask Robin to explain why she has a skull and a Korean Coke bottle on the cover of her brand new book.
Well, isn't it obvious? Doesn't everyone have that? But first, let's hear what Richard Scott had to say to Peter.
Richard Scott was born in London in 1981. His debut collection, Soho, was a Gaze the Word Book of the Year and was shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Prize, the Forward Prize for Best First Collection, and the Polari First Book Prize, among other awards. He teaches poetry at the Faber Academy and is a lecturer in creative writing at Goldsmiths, University of London. He is a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. Today we're going to talk about his latest collection, That Broke into Shining Crystals, published this year, 2025, by Faber. So, welcome Richard Scott to Planet Poetry Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Peter. It's so lovely to be here.
Today we're going to talk about your brand new collection from Faber, and it's called That Broke into Shining Crystals. But first of all, I want to ask that traditional Planet Poetry question. Where in the world do we find you today, Richard?
I'm in Camberwell in southeast London.
Just before we spoke, I was just doing a bit of last-minute web stalking and found that an interview of you, and it was saying that you have this background in opera. How's that transition from being a sort of singing performer into writing poetry? How did that happen?
I guess when you're an opera singer, you are working with texts a lot, so you're kind of thinking about librettos, translating them, trying to understand the feelings within them, and poetry as well when you're singing like lieder and chanson and art song. So I think I was just working with text a lot, and I sort of realized at some point that I'd just sort of fallen in love with poetry. And at the time, I think I was also slightly unhappy as an opera singer. I felt like I wasn't being that creative, maybe, although I'm sure other opera singers would take issue with that and think would say it's very creative. But I think for a long time, I sort of spent a long time thinking that music and poetry were very separate. And I think I sort of had to think like that to transition between worlds. But now I've come to realize that I'm very grateful for my training as an opera singer and working as an opera singer. I realised that in some ways an aria and a poem are very related. They're these spaces of intense, deep feeling and meditation on language. And I think also, well, poetry maybe is singing. It's language under pressure. They're different in a way because obviously when you're singing, you're putting language under pressure, physiologically, you're putting it through your vocal cords and you're shaping the sound with technique. And when you're writing poetry, you're thinking about, sound, you're thinking about concision and rapidity, and you're thinking about all those kind of poetic devices. But they seem very related to me, language under pressure. So maybe I've always been singing and just in a different poetic way now.
Now, the first section of your book is called Still Lives, and it's an extraordinary sequence of ekphrastic poetry, the like of which I've not seen before. Ekphrastic poetry quite often makes me a bit cringy, and it doesn't work for me, but I think this is just an extraordinary sequence. So maybe we could just dive in with the first poem in the collection.
Still Life with Rose. Like a foreskin being pulled back, the damask reveals. Pelvic bowl of pink-fringed shadow, dense sweetmeat bloom, coralled cave, puce, empyrean, with no vanishing points, planetary blush. So let me in, where everything is newborn and crystalline, paused and protected, into that other world that high-shine place of safety arranged and sparking up like a bower. Almost every day, for some moments, I think about him. The black stems, thorns that can prick so deeply, whirl of serrated leaves all just beneath, around. Still, gorgeousness, your petalled cumulus, your constancy helps me live. Oh, Rose, keep on stunning for me, for all us boys who have been ruined by men.
That's just a wow of a poem to open with. The poems in the sequence are inspired by these still life paintings of the 17th and 18th century. When I first read your book, I just kept thinking, I kind of recognised that, and I was Googling furiously. Imagine my surprise when I got to the end of the book, where you actually listed some of the paintings that had been fodder for these marvellous poems. What is extraordinary about this is we're looking at a still life with a rose, and immediately we have this phallic imagery. I sort of found myself quite shocked by that to begin with. But then that sudden intrusion, as we read on, is actually so much embedded in the meaning, the shock of that appearance, as it were. I wanted to ask you how you walked the tightrope between dealing with the art and these other experiences that kind of brought you to it. You've got a quote from Rachel Cusk: "There must be an offering of the self before the painting will open."
Yeah, I mean, the poem does begin with that piece of figurative language.
When I looked at the painting that you referred to, I saw immediately what you meant.
I think some of the work of figurative language can be to make something vivid, energetic, surprising, to maybe help someone re-see it. So I'm so glad that worked. I didn't set out to write a sequence of poems that were sort of speaking to still life paintings. Originally, I was working on a sequence of poems which were looking at the rose as a kind of queer symbol, the symbol of like sensuality and queerness. But those poems didn't work. So they weren't working. And the only ones that were working were with roses from still life paintings. So I guess I felt like there was something there, and I kind of pushed into that space a little bit. I think for me, one of the things that sort of navigated that tightrope between the art and the experience that the speaker brings to the poems is just this sense of the lyric. I think of the poems as lyric poems. I think there's this idea in the poems that, if you focus down, if you tightly sort of use lyric focus and focus down on something is revealed or something is illuminated. This deep feeling surge up in the poem and take the poet by surprise. So I think there's just that sense of focusing on the symbols, and then the lyric wound is opened.
I love that idea of almost surprising yourself when you're writing. I think that really communicates to a reader when the poet is doing that.
I really agree with that Rachel Cusk quote. I love what she said. There must be an offering of the self. In order for the painting or an artwork to fully function, the viewer has to bring something of their subjective, idiomatic experience to it. And I guess, part of the work of these poems is figuring out why these still life paintings prompted such big feelings within me. Later on in the sequence, there's a poem about a painting by Chardin, and I quote from this line where Proust is looking at the Chardin and he's talking about the deep feelings that surge up when he's looking at still life paintings. And one of them is disgust. He says, and sights that disgust you like half empty glasses. And I love that idea. So he talks about, he's looking at the Chardin, he sees beauty, but he also sees disgust. And I think that's right. These still life paintings can prompt such huge and surprising feelings within viewers.
Well, I want to ask you to read Still Life with Three Roses, another extraordinary poem, I think.
I'd be very glad to. Still Life with Three Roses. The three stages of this rose, bud, bloom, overblown, are like the three stages of this boy, pre-trauma, molestation, PTSD. Only none of this was petalled or remotely like these extraordinary shades sliding from blush to rhodonite to empyrean. Only perhaps this being seen, the pearlescent beetle alights on the filament, was unexpectedly beautiful. Drop of photorealistic dew on the stem. Maybe these roses are like the stages of grooming, friendship, and then I can't quite remember exactly what came next. Corolla edge ringed in a deeper and bleeding colour, quite how he made it all happen. Delicate sepal, pistil. Also, I know I am not supposed to tell anyone. Craquelure rosehips scattered about the base of the urn. So don't tell anyone, Richard. A darkness, pink, rotate, gaping, that makes the petals of my mouth wind shut when they should be screaming.
So many thoughts spill out from that for me. The first one was roses have long been a symbol of secrecy. Years ago, I worked for Architects Journal, and one of the journalists said Romans used to hold a rose above a table to signify secrecy. That's why we have those roses in the middle of private rooms on the ceilings. And there's that legal term sub rosa, that you're under the rose, which means it's secret. Then there was this thought about the boy, pre-trauma, molestation, PTSD. There's 3 stages. How in something like a static image, you've managed to sediment all this time. It's not an easy stillness. We're not looking at something frozen. It's a kind of almost moving stillness, if that's not completely mad. What drew you to that? Sorry, that's a very long-winded question.
It's such a lovely question. Yeah, I guess part of the work of the sequence was figuring out why I was so drawn to still life paintings as a genre. Like, I've always been incredibly moved by them. When I'm in a gallery and I see a still life painting, I almost feel shocked or something by them. And I think part of the reason is because something about the varnished, frozen, or sort of caught in amber quality represents, I suppose, how I think the brain can freeze a traumatic experience, a traumatic moment, can freeze hurt. Then it sort of lives in the brain, ambered and frozen, and can sort of constantly be unwittingly recalled back to. But you're right, it's not just the stillness in the still life painting. There are also these incredibly vivid thing. Another of the reasons I love still life paintings, they're so colourful, they're so vivid, they're so dense with meaning. Like, looking into a still life painting, I kind of like fall into it. And I guess one of the reasons why I think they're so vivid and so full of life is because they're so drenched in meaning by the artist. It's beautiful what you were saying about the rose and things being secret. That's definitely there. Also, what's there are things about sensuality, things about the body. Potentially also when we look at the rose, there's something about religious purity there as well. But then there's also something about a fear of death or death coming. There's also maybe something about economics and about wealth. So I think because the symbols are so dense with meaning in a painting, that brings them this kind of vividness and this sort of layeredness. And I think that made me feel as if I could experiment and I could play around. I could use those symbols and expose those meanings, but also find my own.
There is an absolute timelessness about these poems. A lot of it is drawn from the 17th, 18th century paintings, but they feel extremely contemporary. Maybe we should turn to bananas now.
Sure, yeah, okay. Still life with bananas. Curved like dicks they sit, cosy in wicker, an orgy of total yellowness, all plenty and arching, beyond erect, a basketful of morning sex and sugar and sunlight. Not enough things are yellow, only some flowers and yolks and various melamine and plastic things. Even bananas are only yellow for a little while. They spend most of their lives being green and brown. And who talks about the green and brown the underripe and overripe fruit that no one will ever display in a basket and no one will eat. You took all of my yellow days, every moment of bright pleasure, clouded, coloured in, and now there is nothing uncomplicatedly phallic. Meanwhile the world goes on. A checkered tablecloth is laid. There is a dining chair, bent wood arms. Will you ever draw it up, sit opposite, apologize to me? Mostly people don't know they've done something wrong. Mostly apologies are bullshit. And what would yours sound like? How could you apologize for unpeeling, for filling up on my life, for tasting me, pressing your mouth to the flesh, then leaving just this mottled old rind? It's hard to look at bananas. It's hard to be in the sunshine which is always making things unreasonably golden and yellow and better looking without asking for permission. Fuck off, sunshine, I say, on the hard days, like today, when not even this silly fruit can distract me from my ridiculous sadness. Just once I want to see a banana that looks like a dick and laugh. Just once I want to see a dick and not think about you.
I love the idea of mostly apologies are bullshit. You know, even if that person were to apologise, it still would never be enough. You took all my yellow days, you say that. Just once I want to see a dick and not think about you. This phallic imagery is everywhere in these still life poems, and the sustained effect of that is really extraordinary and actually quite shocking, even in 2025.
I guess I feel like the lyric space of a poem is very robust. It can contain whatever you need it to contain. And in the case of this poem, you know, if a dick needs to be in a poem, it should absolutely go in a poem, because I think the poem can contain it, because you know, dicks are and phallic imagery is of the world, and the poem comes from the world. I guess in this poem specifically, you know, the speaker is really haunted by the bananas, and they're really haunted by the phallic imagery. And I guess that speaks to how haunted I've been by these still life paintings. You know, one of the things I'm sort of really interested in is that the still life arrangement, which we see in the painting, actually died a really long time ago, rotted, spoiled, died. And this is speaking back to a Pierre Bonnard painting, which was painted in 1926. So the bananas, they died, you know, 99 years ago. So maybe this still life painting is something of an actual literal ghost. I think the vision, this ghostliness, these symbols speaking from another dimension, have wisdom and things to tell me, you know. And I think one of the things they were saying is that the banana, the phallic imagery, is important to the poem, is important to the speaker in this sequence. So I kind of felt like it was just really necessary to kind of interrogate it. The still lifes were giving me the symbols, giving me the language through which to process and sing.
Bonnard was big on memory, wasn't he? I mean, he painted from memory sometimes. And
I mean, I love that idea as well. Like, you know, the ghostly memory. Like, I love that.
Can we read Still Life with apples, ceramic dish, apples, and pomegranate?
Still life with apple, ceramic dish of apples and a pomegranate. I survived by being still. Still as this red apple on a wooden tabletop. And each time, afterwards, after he had done what he wanted with my body, I packed all the little red apples of myself, each one slightly bruised, bumpy, pockmarked, worm-scarred, spored, mouldering, deep down into the ceramic dish of my body. Disassociative, I now know it's called. And didn't tell anyone who loved me. Compartmentalization, maybe. A symptom is a word trapped inside the body, and I have so many words trapped inside my body, each one red and burnished and hasn't aged at all. Words like ruined, fault, pricktease, molestation, shame, each one painted so perfectly the colour of a hot coal or a fresh graves. And I have so many symptoms, or the colour of an apple smuggled into St. Pelagie prison in 1871 by your sister, numbness, or the colour of an apple watching from the wooden tabletop of your teacher's desk. This stillness is a kind of psychic wound, as he arranges your body into a still life. Apples, ceramic dish, a cracked open pomegranate, these repetitive and distressing images, all the glistening and painful reds beginning to move, to run.
I mean, that's such a killer opening line. I survived by being still. All the red things beginning to move and run at the end, they're kind of still but still bleeding. A symptom is a word trapped inside the body. This is so raw and so amazing. It's an extremely brave poem, and it really doesn't flinch from taking on the worst hurts of the experiences you kind of allude to. Where does this strength to just be unflinching about this come from? There must have been some cog moving in your mind at some moment that thought, right, here and now, this is what's going to be written about.
It's really interesting that you wanted to talk about this poem, because it's one of the last poems that I wrote in the sequence, and I wonder if I needed to have almost written all the other poems in the sequence to sort of understand another reason why the speaker is so moved by the still life paintings or the still life genre. And I think maybe that is because they feel as if they have been, like a still life painting, arranged, frozen by the abuser, by trauma. And I think that they're looking at the still life painting and they're sort of recognizing that stillness within themselves, and that stillness has been a coping method or something they've needed to do to survive. So I think they are, identifying with the still life painting. That identification is helping them find the words. I think it was finding the still life paintings and using these ideas from the lyric. I think the lyric pulled things out of me, revealed things to me, illuminated things to me, taught me about myself and the experiences that I sort of gestured towards. So, and I think the writing poems really came from that. Sometimes I think you can't hide from the lyric wound or from lyric revelation.
I would like you to read the last poem in that sequence.
Still life with plums, melon, peaches, and moss-covered branches. And all those plums, a startling shade of thunder, like, look at the bloom on those plums. I never understood before how you could call discoloration, this full body scar, a bloom, blossom. And a melon in shadow, like something that hasn't been grasped yet, like how maybe transference sends me into the arms of these difficult men who will hurt me and not let me heal. Maybe. How to be happy when happy is not even a thing. I want to be like these 3 peaches you haven't even noticed yet, each one a yolky ginger dawn coming up and tinting everything this crackled gold. Oh, to be peachy keen, I will be again. And it's not my fault that he found me, because I was moss green, downy, singing of life, like these branches, the last symbol that snapped me open with a kind of just being carried in from the garden realism, still life, yet still growing. So keep on growing, Richard.
Yeah. The realization that it wasn't your fault, and still life, yet still growing. just great. And I love the way you say at the end, so keep on growing, Richard, that sort of affirmation. Did you feel the sense of catharsis having completed this sequence?
In terms of the poems being therapeutic, I guess not in a way. I mean, I think I still contain the hurt that I gestured towards in the poems, but I think writing this sequence and writing this book has brought me to a greater understanding of myself. I think I understand things a little more. I think poetry is robust enough to bear witness to something, certainly, but I'm also very interested in the idea that the poem might bear the witness, might carry the poet to a greater sense of understanding of something. These ideas about the impossibility of happiness, but also continuing to grow, that there's more life possible. These all came from the still life painting.
Could you talk us about the sort of the chorus of other writers that have whispered in your ear as you've been putting this book together?
There's a big chorus. I read all the time. I guess some of the big ones. There's Arthur Rimbaud in there. The last sequence that broke into Shining Crystals. Mm. They are inspired by and they speak back to Arthur Rimbaud's Illuminations. I guess I see him as a queer ancestor, and I'm sort of asking him for guidance and wisdom and confidence. And I guess reading Illuminations really brought me to the idea of crystals. In his prose poems, there's crystals, semi-precious stones, crystalline light all the way through. So I think Arthur Rimbaud led me to find the crystals and to sort of learn. Andrew Marvell's another big one. In the middle sequence of the book, there's a long poem called Coy that repurposes the language of Andrew Marvell's poem Tis Coy Mistress. I love that poem. I've always wanted to write something towards it or be in dialogue with it in some way.
The final section that broke into Shining Crystals. The first sequence you have still lives, and here you are with crystals, which are kind of hard and set and have their own molecular structures. But also there's that overlay, attributing things. I was thinking of, crystal healing and so on. I'd like you to read the poem Peridot, principally because it's my favourite stone, but it's also keeper away of evil spirits as well. I was looking it up the other day.
Oh, that's so great. I love that you love Peridot. It's such a beautiful crystal. Peridot. Oh, for a few more of those pre-trauma days when life was as dazzling as a piece of raw peridot, and all my hours were grass stains and beach glass and sycamore leaves glinting and shifting and irises' spears shooting up, 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 and lime cordial, molten peridot, thick and gloopy as time in the bottom of a glass, sliding, coating, and a fresh bruise when a bruise was just a bruise and could fade, and the gloaming when even the gloaming was green, hair green and freckled sky, mustachioed wisps. But he is here too, fission green floor deep within the facet, giving off his own glow, blinding, disorientating, a crystal kind of man, polymorph, because he still has something to teach me and I don't know if I will ever truly learn it. Protective stone, keeper away of evil spirits, where were you when I needed you? His touch was mantle hot and ruinous, intrusive, extrusive. I am always looking for a new frequency, hoping to recover some peridot shard of myself in this lapidary of broken things. But I can only translate what is already here and not transform. Hats off to the crystallographer who is watching chartreuse ions precipitate into livid rocks. I am toxic, petrified ectoplasm, luminously bonded to my past.
I just love the greenness of this, the greenness of youth as well, and the pre-trauma days, life with grass stains and beach glass and all these sort of sycamore leaves, all that harmless, beautiful panoply of greenness. We're sort of melding the past and the future into this one thing, this kind of crystal. Again, we're alluding to this memory and how do hopeful, happy memories make their way around this big obstacle.
I think that's such a perceptive reading of the poem. I guess part of the work of the poem was, falling into the kind of greenness of peridot, like the peridot crystal. It's all these amazing shades, it's kind of olive sometimes, lime green, sage, lots of beautiful greens. And I had such a great time playing around trying to find the various green shades of peridot, using symbols from my childhood like lime cordial and like beach glass. Yeah, I guess that's how hope is found, maybe. I think that the crystal, and looking at the crystal and looking at the colours of the crystal and somehow trying to sort of go through the trauma and envisage those pre-trauma days, that's the kind of message of the crystal, I suppose.
This is a very beautiful poem. So, in a way, the beauty itself transcends the obstacle, as it were.
Crystals are such an amazing, powerful object. So I think, finding the crystals definitely helped me re-envisage things, re-see things. I grew up with crystals. My mum was a homeopath, so we had them around the house, and they were just kind of always in like corners, like sort of rebalancing magnetic fields or sort of like combating electricity, as my mum saw it. So they seemed like very very powerful objects with loads of potential that I was just sort of really used to kind of looking into as a child. And I do see them that way. I see them as very, very powerful and magical. They sort of really evoke deep time to me, so the time that you were talking about sort of perceiving in the poem, I guess a crystal that you hold in your hand could be like 4 million years old. And it sort of helps you in some way sort of perceive time in a slightly different way. And I also love, the crystal also represents other types of wisdom, other types of belief, other thought systems. Underneath its beauty, there's all these ideas about its vibration, about its healing properties. So I think all of that wisdom from the crystals definitely sort of helped me kind of, right into that space and helped me kind of process and write about the traumas that I'm writing about.
Perhaps we should see what onyx brings us.
Sure. Onyx. Out of the lyric rises this mineral being, raw onyx body, banded, blackest marble effects, jet fault lines, inky wounds glitter within his mesmerizing fold. He has survived the mantle's forge. All the dark colours of my life, bruise, scab, lesion, intrusion, dance, seem to radiate from him. Trauma shard, holder onto of previous injuries, he is a kind of asymptomatic mirror activated in crystal grid tetrahedron layout. O ashen-eyed onyx boy, your chiseled arms are cannons erupting. You are stabbing me with bright black shadow. Bright black like how the insides of my eyelids can be bright and black and quavering, these molten pixels of anti-light. I have placed all of my hurt into the lyric space of him. Crypto-crystalline landscape vibrating, and wait, shining, for a new vitalism, vast end to dis-ease.
That's such a stunning line. I have placed all of my hurt into the lyric space of him. Brilliantly self-analytical too, that in a way that person has become a peg to hang on, the dis-ease of life onto almost. This seems to me to be a kind of coming to terms and almost moving on poem. Did it feel like that when you were writing it?
I think that line that I've placed all my hurt into the lyric space of him, I mean, it occurs to me reading it back. I was thinking about being in dialogue with lyric poetry, like placing your hurt into the poem and hoping for some kind of revelation or illumination. Also maybe placing my hurt and asking Arthur Rimbaud to kind of give me guidance or help with it. Maybe also it's kind of addressed to my friends as well, my friends who've been very healing and loving. So I think there's loads of sort of ideas working away in that line. I'm so happy that you like it.
I was wondering if writing these lyric poems has kind of overwritten the original experience now. You own it more somehow.
That's such an interesting question. I don't know about overwriting experience. I think that poetry can offer the poet a new place to live. A homeland. Porcelain writes, the poet's homeland is their poem. And I think part of the work of the crystal poems was kind of constructing this kind of post-trauma crystalline landscape where the speaker might live, a new sort of homeland for the speaker, and where they might learn from the messages of these crystals, crystals which have been born under enormous pressure in the Earth's mantle and broken and continually reformed to emerge kind of shining. So I think, maybe there's this building a crystalline landscape for myself, one which is filled with the agency of crystalline growth.
I'd like to end with the last poem in your collection, which is Quartz.
I would love to read this. Quartz. I kissed time, the unspeakable hour, quivering and fractured pale. Everything was broken and dark. The tumble-down palaces, the shattered water, the bodies of soldiers heaped in the clearings. But I was walking, and the semi-precious stones opened their eyes and looked on. I heard the language of minerals, a kind of glinting tinnitus spelling out elements, properties, helical Gaia, Kirlian camera, aura. White light flared and spread up the silver birches, living wands, and his body, shining cluster, spirit cleanser, was cast in quartz. One by one, I lifted his veils in a dance, and I was dancing. I chased him into the city where he painted the steeples and domes and pub signs into bright shards. I was running, an amethyst head drunk on light. I caught him. I swallowed him. Pure elixir, natural computer, down. I woke up. I mean, really woke up. And it was my day, pure crystalline attention, my bones biomagnetic, reclothed.
You've put us through quite a lot in this collection, and we get to the lightness and that kind of sense of rebirth at the end. It's a beautiful way to end. It's really great.
I hope so. I hope the poem speaks about dawn and kind of chasing the sun, but also maybe chasing Rambo as well, like trying to swallow the sun, trying to swallow the crystal, trying to swallow and imbibe sort of Rambo's influence and wisdom. So I hope maybe there is something. Quartz is such a powerful crystal. It's kind of referred to as a natural computer because it sort of can store a huge amount of information. So the speaker is really just trying to swallow that down and trying to get the messages and the wisdom of quartz into the body.
I guess I should ask you what your next step is in having just published this amazing book.
Well, I guess I'll just continue my practice of reading poems and writing poems. thinking about it now, reading that poem and it being spring, it kind of makes me think, I'll try and do more walking. It's warmer outside. I'll try and get back into the body again, try and use my body again, like the speaker does, when he's kind of running an amethyst head drunk on light. So, yeah, reading, writing, getting back into the body. Maybe that's what's next.
Richard Scott, thank you so much for your time. We'll leave you in this moment, drunk on light. Thanks very much for coming on our show.
Peter. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
This is going to be one of those books that comes up for a big prize this year, I think. Don't you think, Peter? I was really impressed with it. And the way Richard spoke about his practice and his methodology and his influences, all of that made it such a rich interview. I really enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed his reading of those poems, particularly that first section, the still life poems. Weren't they extraordinary?
I think they're absolutely astonishing. I mean, ekphrastic poetry sometimes gives me the ick. It's kind of like, a poem about another art form, write about the actual world. But, he encounters still lives with such freshness and weaves in his own personal freight into that so brilliantly.
Yeah, I agree. I could completely see that. I didn't know what the paintings were, but I could completely picture them, and all the elements are there, weren't they? The fruit, ripe or semi-rotting, the rose with the petals. He somehow made so much of the roses, that all the words for the anatomy of the rose just kind of seamlessly fall together to make you think of the trauma that he'd been through. And the body, very moving and powerful. And that comment you made about jumping straight in with this phallic imagery, I think you said particularly about the still life with bananas, it is quite shocking actually. And yet, like he said, the poetry is robust enough to take it. I really liked that comment.
It never kind of strays into carry-on film territory where you're thinking, oh no, here's another.
No, absolutely.
Penis image.
Yeah, exactly. How do you write a poem about bananas and liken them directly to penises and not make it, nudge, nudge, wink, wink? It's very skilled.
One of my observations about the book is that, there is this event which is sort of shadowed in almost every poem. Of this abuse as a young man. It's seen from 1,000 different directions of these still lives, but also in the crystals as well. For Richard, the crystals are the sort of beauty of them and the shape, but they're sort of freighted with time and other meanings. I think he mentioned his mum was into crystal healing.
Yes, so they were there in his mind, in his memory from childhood.
It's almost like an obstacle, this thing that he keeps trying to get through there, and it crops up unwanted, like it's still life with a rose. Like a foreskin being pulled back, the damask reveals. Straight away, we have this kind of intrusion of a penis image. And I think that's the point, really. Whatever direction we set off, there's always that trauma that, has to be negotiated in everything. It's quite overwhelming.
It seemed to me that he weaves in some very violent words in with lush descriptions of fruit and flowers and the beauty of a rose, but we've still got not just obvious reminders like sharp thorns, but, some of the word choices pull you up, make you think of what's really going on below. And that the poem, was it Still Life with Three Roses, where it finishes on that make the petals of my mouth wind shut when they should be screaming. I mean, it was just really impactful.
Yeah, there's no doubt he's dealing with a trauma, and there's a distinct before and after. In his Peridot poem, there's that, sense of his green and younger days, and then this massive obstacle comes. Everything's seen around that sort of block of this great event, and he lives on despite it.
Yeah.
And there is a bravery and just gorgeousness about the results of what he's done.
Yes. The green, the bit you picked out there, the green, and we have it in a number of the poems. There was this sense of the greenness, the unripeness, like of the banana or the fruit or the flower, the greenness as a colour of innocence. And I liked at the end when he was talking about his influences and, asking Rambo for guidance. It's like he was kind of, and he said something about the poetry can offer the poet a new place to live. So that's what he was saying, I suppose, of how do you get to that place where you can live with all of this, and the poetry sort of takes him there.
Yeah, a thought from Paul Celan about the poem being the sort of home of the poet almost. Rambo, definitely his style and kind of that freedom and pouring outness that Rambo has in some of his, especially his prose poems. The spirit of that, I think, really runs through that Crystals section. But he doesn't wear his influences too heavily. Richard Scott is the most important writer here. I love what he said about, his reading practice. I mean, I read all the time as well, but I don't think of it as a reading practice. It makes me feel like I should be sort of sitting in lotus position every day.
It has got that, the sense of yoga, doesn't it? There's something that you do on a regular basis. It is your practice. A lot of editors, for example, moan that poems come into them from people who clearly don't read poetry. And it's such a complete part of one's practice if one is a poet. So, yes, I liked that reference.
I admire so much of the poetry we cover on Planet Poetry, but some of these poems I absolutely love. I think this is a really, really strong collection. He does the brand of Faber proud in this. I think it's a marvellous collection. Yeah,
agreed.
So that's Richard Scott, and the book's called That Broke into Shining Crystals, published this year, 2025, by Faber.
Yeah, that interview with Richard, it set you off on all kinds of avenues, didn't it, Peter? I think you've been inspired to go searching on green things and crystalline things.
Well, yeah, I just adore that poem about peridot. I can imagine lots of our listeners are all raging now because they say peridot, but peridot and peridot are both allowable pronunciations in British English, despite when you go on the internet, you have videos saying it's peridot.
I don't trust those videos, though, do you?
Yeah, they're sort of...
Yeah, some of these videos, they're rubbish, aren't they?
They're all by Americans in their basements. For some reason, I was obsessed by the colour green when I was young. I was really all about art until I was about 18 and did A-level art and all the rest of it. I just adored green from being a really small child. And one of the first poems I ever found for myself when I was sort of crossing the border from visual things into words was this poem by D.H. Lawrence called Green. And the only reason I sort of picked it up was because of its title. He published it in something like 1917. It's an Imagist poem. The Imagists were very influenced by Japanese and Chinese poetry and the brevity and this idea of the concrete imagery and minimalism. Ezra Pound, who kicked it all off, an intellectual and emotional complex in an instant of time. That's what the sort of ideal was for an Imagist poem. Anyway, D.H. Lawrence had written all kinds of poems, but he sort of stumbled across this poem, which the Imagists seized on as being one of their own. And it's called Green. And it goes like this. Green. The dawn was apple green. The sky was green wine held up in the sun. The moon was a golden petal between. She opened her eyes, and green they shone, clear like flowers undone. For the first time, now for the first time seen. So, something quite nice about that. In finding this again, I was reading some wildly different interpretations of what it meant and who it was referring to. It could have been Frida, which was his green-eyed lover who left her family for him at some point.
Right.
But there's other interpretations about it being somebody's first time. What do you feel about D.H. Lawrence? Did you have to read his novels when you were at school and stuff?
Yeah, unfortunately, it was one of those. It's a shame, isn't it? Sometimes if you didn't have a great time at school with them, you sort of feel reluctant to go back to them. D.H. Lawrence, one of those. I think we did Sons and Lovers. I can't remember exactly. Oh, no, The Rainbow. That's right, The Rainbow.
Oh, I did The Rainbow too, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was on the syllabus, wasn't it? Yeah.
It's all people thundering around with terrible emotions that they can't explain to each other. I find it He was so, it's interesting how his star has kind of waned a bit.
Yeah, I'm surprised actually thinking about it. I'd have thought he would go down quite well today.
Just to finish off my green thing.
Oh, yes.
I picked up Chroma by Derek Jarman.
Mm-hmm.
It's a kind of book of thoughts stitched around different colours. Derek Jarman was a filmmaker. He ended up having a garden in Dungeness. I don't know if you've ever been to that place.
I have. I've been inside the house there as well, actually. Had a tour, and it was fascinating. I mean, the place is a riot of colour and interesting things that he accumulated, and there's a big arts library in there. So, yeah, it's very interesting place.
It's one of those places you go to and you think, it's unlike anywhere else in England. It's this sort of strange, shingly, absolutely flat place with a nuclear power station on the edge of it.
Yeah, Dungeness, and right in front of the power station. I think they've been decommissioned now, those power stations, but they're still there, obviously. But there's also this a lighthouse, isn't there? And it's the start of that little railway, the Romney Hythe and Dymchurch Railway, like a miniature railway which you can go on, but it's very uncomfortable.
In fact, I've been on that railway, cramped into it with my father-in-law on one of his birthdays. He used to work in the power station there, and
Oh, really?
Yeah, we sort of chugged off on that tiny little train and got off and had fish and chips with the family.
Yeah.
That was all good.
It's a funny little Lilliputian train, and you go at the backs of people's back gardens at one point. You feel like you're kind of almost in their kitchen with them. It's very intimate. I don't know how, they must just not worry about it, but...
We went in the royal carriage apparently the carriage that Queen Elizabeth had ridden in. Anyway, because we're all massive royalists on the Planet Poetry podcast.
I had a vision of Queen Elizabeth I for a minute there, but it's not that old.
So anyway, one of the things that Derek Jarman observes, he says, not everyone finds solace in green. The photographer Faye Godwin said to me last week that she was sick of photographing green. There's too much green in England. Dungeness, with its ochre grasses and bone-beached shingle, came as a relief. So I don't know if we've got a superabundance of green now that we're in the middle of what promises to, or the beginning of what promises to be a drastic drought in this country.
Is that right? Is there a drought predicted?
We've had no rain in spring, yeah. I don't know where you've been. Almost no rain.
We had a couple of showers the other day.
Richard Scott's been troubling us in other ways. The whole idea of still lives. It's very pertinent to your new publication, isn't it?
Oh, little segue, into my new book.
Just see what we did there.
Well, yes, I love still lives, and I was really interested in what he had to say. And so when it came to deciding on a cover image for my collection, I wanted, because it's called The Mayday Diaries, I wanted to have something on there that somehow suggested the themes in the book.
Yeah.
So I pulled together a lot of my own personal memorabilia, strange objects from a Korean Coke bottle. I used to collect foreign Coke bottles when I visited foreign countries. That's a bit sad, isn't it?
That's interesting.
I knew it would come in handy. One day, this Korean Coke bottle and, a glass of wine, and there's some random computer cables. There's a fake magnolia, and there's diaries. There's some of my old diaries.
There's an
old file of
a little photo of you in there as well as a young person.
A couple of little photos of me, lots of funny things. Anyway, so I put them all together, and I wanted to make it a particular type of still life called a vanitas.
Oh.
I think it was mainly a Dutch thing. So if you go to somewhere like The Hague or Amsterdam, you go to the big art museums, you'll see a lot of these Dutch still life paintings, and they're called vanitas because it's from the Latin for vanity, or all is vanity. Yeah. In other words, our lives are nothing, basically. Everybody dies, and so let's not get tied up in our worldly goods and our worldly lives, because it's all going to come to nothing.
That sounds very, very cheery genre.
But they're actually very beautiful. They're very beautiful. This is something that Richard said, wasn't it? That you see these compositions and you almost fall into them. They're often very lifelike, and you have a half-eaten bit of pomegranate or some grapes that are slightly going mouldy. You'll have skulls. You'll have candles that have been blown out. Often there's a clock or a pocket watch that's sort of maybe broken or something. And so it's the arranging of these objects, and then they're always lit in a certain way, a little bit gloomy. But they're just so beautiful to look at. They're usually quite small, and you kind of, you get into them. So mine includes extracts from pages of work diaries and other things like that. And it's all kind of falling off a table. And I really had fun with this image. And then when I took the photo and I played with it a little bit to make it more gloomy. And that's what I used on the front cover. But it's every object's got a significance, and most of them are kind of related to poems in the book, or at least overarching themes. So I just thought it's a bit more fun as well. You're not just reading the book. You can have a look at the cover and think, ooh, yeah, I wonder where that comes into it or something. So I just thought it was a bit more fun that way, a bit more personal. And so I was really pleased when the publisher said, yeah, that's fine, that we'll go with that.
I think it's great, yeah, doing your own cover, I think. And it looks brilliant as well. I mean, and also it doesn't, when you look at it, it doesn't inspire you with kind of thoughts of, memento mori
Death.
And kind of ghastliness.
Well, it sort of should do, because there is a skull in there.
Yeah.
It's not a human skull. It's a fox skull. There's a few things that I hope instill a sense of vanitas.
So it's caused you to be extremely busy, hasn't it, recently?
Yeah, we had the launch last week in Lewis, which you were reading as well. So I know some of our listeners were at that launch as well, weren't they?
It was absolutely great fun.
Really nice. Poets and non-poets.
Yeah.
At a poetry book
Real
launch.
people.
So it's going to keep me out of mischief for the next few months doing readings and stuff.
Yeah, obviously I'm biased, but I would suggest you buy it.
Obviously. Right, end of promo there, I think.
Yes.
It's not all about us, Peter.
Well, some of it is.